Welcome to Kinky Knots Cafe, Proactive is the Way, where we provide you tools and resources to enhance your mind, body, and spirit. Get ready, folks. Let us nurture you from the inside out.
Vision waits for us, ready to give itself. We use countless techniques to cut ourselves off from it. Kennelly. This month, we are going to focus on how to be more radically open-minded and learn about the barriers that naturally exist within each one of us when it comes to making decisions. Ray shares that the two biggest barriers to being open-minded and making good decisions are our ego and blind spots. Together, they make it difficult for us to objectively see what is true about ourselves and life circumstances, and as such, not only hinders our capabilities to make good decisions, but also to leverage each other effectively. But why do we have such egos and develop these blind spots? As we build on this idea of our ego and blind spots serving as barriers, we will focus more on the why these barriers exist. As I ventured further into better understanding our barriers, I looked into the definition of ego and blind spots. Ego is related to a person's sense of self-esteem or self-importance, and it is only perceived in a negative light when we elevate our personal beliefs and attributes as the foundation of morality. It is when we ignore the complementary and symbiotic beauty within our differences and prefer to lean in on our own understanding versus seeking truth. Our blind spots are our prejudices or subjectivity that we have in which we are often unaware of, an area of ignorance or direction in which our vision is obscured due to a lack of information and awareness, or our own personal motivations and perceptions, but influence our day-to-day. When we tend to ignore and focus on leaning on our own understanding, I kept asking myself, but why? And the notion of fear and vulnerability kept presenting itself. When we live in a state of fear, it is difficult to be vulnerable, to be exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally, or on the flip side, to be vulnerable can induce fear. If subjected to this state at any point within our lives, we have a tendency to develop safeguards to protect ourselves. These protections we develop may negatively impact us in making the best decisions and living life fully and unashamed. Today, we will discuss how the inability to be vulnerable and the ramifications thereof plays out in our lives and the steps we can take to adjust our behavior to be happier, more effective, receptive to other thoughts and perspectives, and establish better relationships with others. And what better way to learn more about this topic than by garnering knowledge from one of the best researchers on vulnerability? Brene Brown is a research professor at the University of Houston and has spent the last 2 decades studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. In her book, Daring Greatly, She explains how vulnerability is both the core of difficult emotions like fear, grief, and disappointment. And by embracing vulnerability, it becomes the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, empathy, innovation, and creativity. It is courageous to step outside of our comfort zone by conducting a self-introspection that sheds the light on our lives, allowing us to be fully seen and to fully see so that our lives could be more meaningful and purposeful. In Daring Greatly, Brene starts off by sharing what it means to dare greatly. She shares that what we know matters, but who we are matters more. Being, rather than knowing, requires showing up and letting ourselves be seen. It requires us to dare greatly, to be vulnerable. She states that vulnerability is not weakness, and the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure we face every day are not optional. Our only choice is a question of engagement. Our willingness to own and engage with our vulnerability determines the depth of our courage and the clarity of our purpose. And the level to which we protect ourselves from being vulnerable is a measure of our fear and disconnection. In this book, you will learn about what drives our fear of being vulnerable. How are we protecting ourselves from vulnerability? What price are we paying when we shut down and disengage? How do we own and engage with vulnerability so we can start transforming the way we live, love, parent, and lead? In this book, the first step in better understanding examined our culture. Brene believes that we live in a culture of scarcity and narcissistic mindset. And in looking at these two behaviors through the vulnerability lens, shame-based fear of being labeled as ordinary and unworthy is detrimental to the healing that needs to occur for systemic change and growth. To help us overcome these cultural stigmas, she guides us through debunking the vulnerability myths. Myth number 1, vulnerability is weakness. Vulnerability is the core of all emotions and feelings. To feel is to be vulnerable. To believe vulnerability is weakness is to believe that feeling is weakness. To foreclose on our emotional life out of a fear that the cost will be too high is to walk away from the very thing that gives purpose and meaning to living. And if we want to reclaim the essential emotional part of our lives and reignite our passion and purpose, we have to learn how to own and engage with our vulnerability and how to feel the emotions that come with it. Myth number 2, claiming that you don't do vulnerability. In her words, we can't opt out of the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure that's woven through our daily experiences. Life is vulnerable. And when we pretend that we can avoid vulnerability, we engage in behaviors that are often inconsistent with who we want to be. Experiencing vulnerability isn't a choice. The only choice we have is how we are going to respond when we are confronted with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Myth number 3, Vulnerability is letting it all hang out. Vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and our experiences with people who have earned the right to hear them. Being vulnerable and open is mutual and an integral part of the trust-building process. When we learn to share appropriately and with boundaries, it means sharing with people whom we've developed relationships with that can bear the weight of our story. The result of this mutually respectful vulnerability is increased connection, trust, and engagement. Myth number 4, we can go it alone. We simply can't learn to be more vulnerable and courageous on our own. Sometimes our first and greatest dare is asking for support. I really love the fact that she debunked this myth and encourage you to listen to her TED Talk to learn about the folks she enlisted to help her through her struggles with vulnerability. As we move forward, Brene takes us through our own training in which she dubbed Gremlin Ninja Warrior Training to explore the darkness of vulnerability and discover the infinite power of our light. She provides us tools and resources to embrace our vulnerability by practicing shame resilience. Brene highlights that shame derives its power from being unspeakable. And if we cultivate enough awareness about shame to name it and speak to it, it possesses no power. Shame hates having words wrapped around it. And if we speak shame, it begins to wither. And just the way exposure to light was deadly for the gremlins, language and story bring light to shame and destroy it. She highlights shame from a man's perspective and shame from a woman's perspective. But I really enjoyed the perspective on shame and innovation by Peter Sheehan, an author, speaker, and CEO of Change Labs. Change Labs is a global consultancy building and delivering large-scale behavioral change projects for clients such as Apple and IBM on shame. As he discussed the killer of innovation, Peter shares, the secret killer of innovation is shame. You can't measure it, but it is there. And every time someone holds back on a new idea, fails to give their manager much needed feedback, and is afraid to speak up in front of a client, you can be sure shame played a part. That deep fear we all have of being wrong, of being belittled, and of feeling less than is what stops us taking the very risks required to move our companies, our organizations forward. And if you want a culture of creativity and innovation where sensible risks are embraced on both a market and individual level, start by developing the ability of managers, leaders, clergy, and the likes to cultivate an openness to vulnerability on their teams and within their organization. Brilliant. Brilliant. So, how do we protect or shield ourselves from vulnerability? We don't. We dare greatly. And we dare greatly by stopping, no longer foreboding joy, and learn to practice gratitude. We let go of perfectionism and appreciate the beauty of cracks. We steer clear of numbing, because in our attempts to numb the darkness, we numb the light, dulling our experiences of love, joy, belonging, creativity, and empathy. It is imperative that we learn how to actually feel our feelings, staying mindful about numbing behaviors, and learning how to lean into the discomfort of hard emotions is critical. And we can do this by setting boundaries, finding true comfort in cultivating spirit. Be present, pay attention, and keep moving forward. Brene, she takes us through a number of other shields and techniques to overcome. You can check the others out by picking up a copy of Daring Greatly by visiting the KK Cafe approved book list. Lastly, to ensure that we are embracing our own vulnerability and cultivating shame resilience in hopes to espouse change, Brene covers how we effectively mind the gap by closing the disengagement divide as we discover the perils of cognitive dissonance, a discomfort that a person can experience when their behavior does not align with their beliefs, and how to be engaged and committed to aligning our values with action. The information in this book truly helped me to better understand myself and natural inclinations that espoused open-mindedness or hindered my ability to be receptive to other thoughts and ideologies. And while I may not agree or ever act, it permitted me the ability to refrain from judging, to condemn. And in this process, I have learned to listen and give myself more of an opportunity to reflect and digest information. And if it resonates with me, I can choose to act in favor of. And if it does not, at least I have trained my mind and spirit the art of being open to other thoughts and perspectives. It is truly one of the paths towards progressiveness and growth. Brene then wraps up vulnerability and what it looks like as we practice being more vulnerable in our education system, work, and parenting. This was a great book, folks, on vulnerability that took me beyond what I anticipated. As a researcher, Brene dropped so many pearls of wisdom that this overview does not do this book justice, but I hope it inspired you to check out the book and desire to read it from end to end, cover to cover. Join us in 2 weeks as we continue our discussions on the courage to be vulnerable, as Tiffany and others join us to discuss a time in which they had to be vulnerable and what they learned from the experience. We look forward to you joining us, and in preparation for our discussions, please make sure to pick up a copy of Daring Greatly by Brene Brown by visiting the KK Cafe approved book list. To access all replays or learn more about Kinky Knots Cafe's Proactive is the Way, please visit www.kinkyknotscafe.com. Proactive is the way, my friends. All right, folks, before we go, I want to take some time to announce the winner for our quarterly giveaway. Please remember that to win, you must follow Proactive is the Way on Podbean. Join the Proactive is the Way group. And when you join, hopefully participate in the Proactive is the Way group by providing a meaningful comment or engaging in any activities. And just remember that the more that you do, the more times your name is entered into the drawing. The winner for our quarterly giveaway is Trady Abyssinia. All right, folks, thank you to all those who have supported and continue to support the Proactive is the Way podcast. We truly do appreciate you. Please continue to participate, and please make sure that you like, that you share all of the goodness that we bring to you. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.